The dawn of August 13, 1704, broke over the rolling plains near the Danube like a fragile promise, soft golden light, spilling over mist-shrouded fields. Yet beneath that serene veil, the continent teetered on the edge of catastrophe. Europe, under the shadow of Louis XIV's ambition, faced the grim prospect of French hegemony. Entire nations could have fallen, empires reshaped overnight, their destinies rewritten on the blade of a sword. But on this day, a coalition of desperate allies, English, Dutch, and Imperial forces, stood between a dream of domination and the terrifying reality of conquest. You can almost hear it, the clatter of armor, the anxious murmur of soldiers, the nervous creak of wheels rolling artillery into position. The air is thick with dust and the acrid scent of gunpowder, mingling with sweat and the iron tang of impending bloodshed. Somewhere, a young cavalryman tightens his gauntlets, stealing a last glance at the rising sun, unaware that history is about to bend around him. A cannon fires in the distance, a signal of the chaos soon to come. How could a single battle fought on seemingly ordinary fields in Bavaria halt the ambitions of Europe's most powerful king and pivot the balance of the continent for decades? This is a story of courage, cunning, and catastrophe narrowly avoided. From the tremors of strategy whispered in war councils to the screams of soldiers, clashing steel to steel, Blenheim would mark the point where ambition collided with alliance, leaving its scar on history forever. Wide shots sweep across the battlefield, the Danube glinting under the morning sun, banners fluttering, horses pawing at the ground, artillery crews hustling. Every movement carries the weight of destiny. Somewhere amidst the tension, a soldier's letter to his family is half-written. A leader whispers a prayer, and the world holds its breath. By nightfall, nothing would be the same. To understand Blenheim, one must first peer into the turbulent web of early 18th century Europe, a continent bristling with ambition, resentment, and fragile alliances. The year was 1701, and Louis XIV of France, the Sun King, reigned supreme, his authority stretching from the Pyrenees to the Rhine. For decades, France's expansionist policies had unnerved its neighbors, threatening the balance of power that fragile diplomacy had maintained. Since the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, the War of the Spanish Succession erupted from a seemingly simple question: who would inherit the Spanish throne after the death of the childless Charles II of Spain? Charles II's death in 1700 created a vacuum that Louis XIV quickly sought to exploit. His grandson, Philip of Anjou, had a legitimate claim to the Spanish throne, but a Philip on the Spanish throne, allied with France, would mean a Franco-Spanish superpower dominating Europe. Alarmed, a coalition formed to contain French ambitions, the English under Queen Anne, the Dutch Republic striving to protect its trade and borders, and the Holy Roman Empire under Emperor Leopold I, desperate to prevent French encroachment into Central Europe. By 1704, these alliances had coalesced into the Grand Alliance, united not just by politics, but by a shared fear of France's might. At the center of strategy was John Churchill, the Duke of Marlborough, a commander whose reputation balanced cunning and audacity. Marlborough, an Englishman by birth but a soldier of Europe by choice, had spent years studying warfare, mastering maneuver, and observing both allies and enemies. Alongside him was Prince Eugene of Savoy, the Imperial commander, whose tactical brilliance complemented Marlborough's strategic vision. Opposing them were Marshal Tallard and Marshal Marcin, French veterans, skilled but overconfident, confident in their numerical superiority and the perceived weakness of the Allied coalition. The stakes could not have been higher. France's forces had already conquered much of the Spanish Netherlands and held sway across the Rhine. A French victory in Bavaria could open a path to Vienna itself, threatening the heart of the Habsburg Empire. Civilians whispered rumors of villages burned, of soldiers conscripting men from farms, and of entire regions falling under French rule. Merchants fretted as trade routes became battlegrounds. Priests warned of the moral peril of a Europe under the Sun King. Months of maneuvering preceded the fateful day. Prior skirmishes at Hexstadt in 1703 had shown the vulnerabilities of both sides. Intelligence flowed slowly, often distorted, carried by riders across rivers and forests, shaping the cautious yet audacious strategies of commanders. Secret letters revealed French plans to divide and conquer the Allied forces, while Marlborough studied maps of the Danube's winding courses, the surrounding villages, and the forests that could conceal ambushes. On the social front, the war-strained civilian life. Villages near the front lines were haunted by the constant drumbeat of marching boots. Children hid in the tall grass as cavalry units thundered past. Farmers abandoned fields, leaving harvests to rot. For many, the distant ambitions of kings were no longer abstract, they were flesh and blood, felt in hunger, fear, and the crackle of musket fire on the horizon. Legends began to circulate of commoners aiding spies or sabotaging supply lines. Small acts that would ripple into the Great Confrontation. By midsummer 1704, the Allied forces had marched into Bavaria. Their numbers were smaller than the French, roughly 52,000 troops combined, against a French force of 56,000, but their cohesion, discipline, and morale were exceptional. The French, confident in their local support and experience, believed that the coalition would crumble under pressure. Yet Marlborough and Eugene had discovered that the French overextended their lines, leaving vulnerabilities in the village of Blenheim and along the Danube's floodplain. It was a gamble, a calculated risk that, if successful, could reverse decades of French dominance. Maps of the era reveal a chessboard of possibilities: rivers to ford, hills to dominate, villages to fortify. Troop movements were carefully timed. Artillery placements were studied with meticulous attention. Rumors circulated that the Allies intended to strike not just with brute force, but with precision, hitting the French where they were weakest. Soldiers listened to these rumors with a mix of fear and hope, whispering in their tents, wondering which among them would survive to tell the tale. And so, the stage was set. By August, the world held its breath. The coalition's leaders, aware that a single misstep could doom their armies, walked the fields, pointing to contours on maps, marking where cannons might fall, where cavalry could charge. The air vibrated with anticipation. It was a quiet tension, unlike the chaos to come, a calm before a storm that would reshape Europe. Every element, the political stakes, the personal ambitions of commanders, the fears and hopes of soldiers, the movements of entire nations coalesced into a singular, inevitable confrontation. Blenheim was no ordinary battle. It was to become the fulcrum upon which the War of the Spanish Succession would pivot, the decisive point where alliance met ambition, courage met cunning, and history itself waited to be rewritten. As August approached its zenith in 1704, the Allied forces and their French counterparts braced themselves on opposite sides of the Danube, each aware that history's gaze would soon fall upon them. For Marlborough and Eugene, preparation was a delicate dance between discipline and improvisation, for victory would depend not merely on numbers, but on cohesion, morale, and the ability to read the enemy like an open book. The Allies' encampments stretched across gently rolling plains and wooded ridges, tents fluttering in the early morning breeze. Soldiers sharpened blades and polished muskets, their reflections catching the first light of dawn. Drummers rehearsed signals that would communicate orders across the chaos of battle. Cavalry units exercised maneuvers, charging through dust-choked fields with hooves pounding in synchrony, while artillery crews tested cannon recoil, noting every misfire and calculating each trajectory with precision. The smell of gunpowder, sweat, and manure mingled in the air, a pungent, almost sacred scent of impending war. Leadership councils were held in the hushed glow of lantern light. Marlborough and Eugene pored over maps inked with villages, rivers, and forests, discussing approaches with quiet intensity. "We strike at the village first," Marlborough murmured, tracing a finger along the Danube floodplain. "If we take Blenheim and control the crossings, we disrupt their lines, force them into disarray." Eugene nodded, considering the terrain: marshy banks that could trap cavalry, narrow roads where artillery might choke, a sun-baked plain perfect for cannon fire. Every decision carried the weight of thousands of lives. Meanwhile, French forces under Marshal Tallard and Marshal Marcin fortified villages and built breastworks of earth and timber. Tallard, confident in his numerical advantage, dismissed warnings of overextended lines. He rode through his encampment, observing musketeers cleaning weapons, cavalry sharpening lances, artillerymen calculating gunpowder charges. His officers debated flanking maneuvers, but morale was uneven. Some soldiers muttered about fatigue and supply shortages. Intelligence played a crucial role. Scouts slipped through forests and across river bends, sending back sketches and reports of enemy positions. Civilians, caught between armies, whispered rumors of allied strategies, sometimes intentionally misleading one side or the other. A farmer, hiding his children in a barn loft, later recounted seeing Marlborough inspecting a bridge under cover of twilight, measuring distances with a hand-drawn map. Small actions that would later prove pivotal. Preparations were also psychological. Soldiers were reminded of their duty, given speeches invoking honor, vengeance, and loyalty. Rituals were performed, banners blessed, drums struck in ceremonial rhythms. Trumpets sounded to call courage to the hearts of men. Eugene himself addressed his troops one evening, his voice steady despite the tension. "Remember, we fight not for glory alone, but to save our homes, our families, our way of life." For many, it was the first time the enormity of the conflict had truly settled in. Supplies were meticulously arranged. Wagons lined with barrels of food, ammunition, and medical stores formed a lifeline that could mean the difference between endurance and collapse. Horses were fed and rested, cannon repositioned, and each soldier assigned to a role. Every movement choreographed to withstand the unpredictability of combat. Even minor details, shoeing horses, patching tents, waterproofing powder bags, were treated with reverence, for the margin of error was vanishingly small. Comparisons to previous battles haunted commanders. Marlborough recalled the costly mistakes of earlier campaign skirmishes where lack of coordination had led to heavy losses. Eugene remembered the hard lessons of northern Italy, where terrain had favored defenders over attackers. They applied these lessons now. The Allies would concentrate firepower, strike decisively, and exploit French vulnerabilities, rather than relying on attrition. Among the soldiers, fear and anticipation mingled. A young English pikeman, barely 17, carved initials into his musket stock, praying silently for survival. Dutch infantry, seasoned from prior campaigns, shared stories of comrades lost to sunstroke, river accidents, or stray cannonballs. Civilians observed strange rituals, troops marching in circles, officers consulting compasses, the constant drilling of formations, and whispered of omens, hoping luck would favor the coming clash. By the eve of August 13th, the battlefield itself seemed alive with expectation. Mist curled along the Danube, reflecting lanterns as men whispered final prayers. The villages Blenheim, Oberglaheim, and Lutzingen stood as both fortifications and traps, their narrow streets ready to choke the unwary. Cannons were positioned to dominate approaches. Musketeers prepared to fire volleys in disciplined succession. Horses snorted, pawed at the ground, and soldiers clenched reins and pikes, ready to charge, ready to defend, ready to gamble everything on a single, decisive day. All these preparations, the meticulous planning, the physical drills, the psychological fortification coalesced into a tense stillness, a calm that masked the chaos soon to erupt. Marlborough, Eugene, Tallard, and Marcin all knew one misstep, one delay, one unforeseen variable could shatter armies and determine the fate of nations. Every glance across the Danube, every whispered command, every breath drawn in the still air carried history in its weight. The battlefield was primed. Armies braced, and the sun began its climb toward destiny. In mere hours, the plains of Bavaria would echo with the thunder of cannons, the clash of steel, and the cries of men and horses alike. The preparations were complete. All that remained was for history to unfold. August 13th, 1704, dawned with a fragile serenity over the Bavarian plains. Yet beneath the calm lay a seething tension, the air vibrating with anticipation. Marlborough's allied forces, approximately 52,000 strong, were arrayed along the Danube floodplain, infantry forming tight lines, cavalry poised on flanks, and artillery positioned to dominate the open fields. Opposite them, Marshal Tallard's French army, numbering nearly 56,000, was spread across villages and ridges, confident in their numerical superiority yet unaware of the precision and audacity that Marlborough and Eugene had meticulously cultivated. The opening phase of the Battle began with a deadly chess game of maneuvering and skirmishes. Early morning mist shrouded Blenheim and its surrounding villages. Scouts reported the first movements, French skirmishers advancing toward the Allied lines, muskets flashing as volleys rattled through the fog. Marlborough, mounted on his chestnut horse, signaled the first coordinated volley. Cannons roared across the plain, their thunder shaking the earth, sending clouds of smoke and dust into the air. The clash of steel followed almost immediately, soldiers charging, firing, and falling in a chaotic ballet of life and death. On the Allied left, Eugene led an assault on Blenheim. His cavalry thundered through narrow lanes, targeting French artillery positions. The earth shook beneath their hooves. Musket smoke curled in spirals around timbered houses, mixing with the acrid scent of gunpowder. Amid the chaos, individual acts of bravery shone. A Dutch infantryman, separated from his unit, held a doorway against a French attack, buying crucial time for reinforcements. In Blenheim itself, villagers fled or cowered in cellars, witnessing the horrors of war up close, their homes transformed into fortresses, and death traps simultaneously dot as the day progressed. The main engagement erupted across the Danube plain. Tallard attempted to exploit his center, sending fresh columns of French infantry to pierce the Allied lines. Marlborough, anticipating the maneuver, ordered reserves forward, his cavalry wheeling in precise arcs to counter the advance. Horses reared, swords clashed, and smoke obscured vision, turning the battlefield into a nightmare of confusion, courage, and carnage. Soldiers struggled through mud, blood, and fallen comrades, the relentless roar of cannon and musket fire echoing in their ears. A pivotal turning point occurred in the afternoon. Marlborough identified the overextended French right flank near the village of Lutzingen. With a sudden, audacious charge, Allied cavalry smashed into the flank, disrupting French formations and creating a ripple of panic. Tallard attempted to rally his men, but the chaos spread, amplified by the relentless cannonade from Allied positions. In that moment, the French numerical advantage evaporated, replaced by disorder and fear. Letters later written by survivors described it as a maelstrom of smoke, noise, and the scent of blood, where the line between life and death blurred in an instant. Meanwhile, Eugene coordinated an assault on the French left, pressing from the north and enveloping enemy positions with disciplined infantry formations. His men advanced in staggered lines, muskets raised, volley after volley tearing through French ranks. Horses screamed as cavalry collided in full charge, bodies and weapons entwined in a brutal testament to human endurance and fearlessness. Civilians hidden in barns and attics witnessed the horrors, their cries punctuated by cannon fire and the metallic clash of sabers. Throughout the battle, leadership decisions proved decisive. Marlborough's ability to read French intentions, coupled with Eugene's precision strikes, allowed the Allies to maintain cohesion under extreme pressure. French commanders, despite skill and experience, struggled to coordinate amidst the fog of war and the panic spreading through their lines. Tallard himself would later recount being captured mid-battle, a humiliation emblematic of French disarray and the collapse of command. As evening approached, the battlefield bore the scars of relentless combat. Smoke hung like a suffocating shroud over the Danube. The cries of the wounded mingled with the clatter of retreating columns. Allied forces had secured Blenheim, Oberglaheim, and key positions along the river. French forces were shattered, with thousands killed, wounded, or captured. Cavalry units pursued fleeing soldiers, capturing artillery and supplies, while infantry mopped up remaining resistance. The plains, once green and tranquil, were now littered with broken muskets, shattered cannon, and the human cost of ambition clashing with strategy. Human interest anecdotes pepper the narrative of that fateful day. A French drummer, separated from his unit, hid among corpses to survive, recounting later the surreal quiet as he watched Marlborough's forces advance. An Allied artillery officer described a cannonball passing so close, he could feel the wind it displaced. Letters home spoke of miraculous survival and heroism. A young officer saving a comrade trapped beneath a fallen horse, a standard bearer holding the flag aloft despite grievous wounds. These intimate stories, small in the vast scale of battle, encapsulate the tension, courage, and unpredictability that defined Blenheim. By nightfall, the outcome was undeniable. The Allied victory was complete, decisive, and catastrophic for the French. Smoke still rose from burning villages. Cries of anguish and relief mingled across the battlefield. Soldiers collapsed from exhaustion, both allies and prisoners alike, while commanders assessed their positions, exhausted but aware of the historic significance. Blenheim had not merely been won. It had been seared into history as the day ambition met strategy, and Europe's balance of power was irrevocably altered. As darkness fell over the shattered plains of Blenheim, a grim and poignant silence settled upon the battlefield. The ground, once fertile and tranquil, now bore the scars of relentless conflict, trenches gouged by cannon fire, villages partially leveled, and the lifeless forms of thousands of soldiers strewn across the Danube floodplain. The immediate aftermath of the battle was a landscape of devastation, both physical and psychological, where the cost of victory was painfully visible. Casualties were staggering. Estimates suggest that the French suffered over 20,000 killed, wounded, or captured, including the prominent Marshal Tallard, whose capture sent shockwaves through Paris. The Allied forces, though victorious, had not emerged unscathed. With approximately 12,000 casualties, soldiers trudged through mud and blood, tending to the wounded while hauling artillery and supplies from the battlefield. Field surgeons worked frantically, often improvising with rudimentary tools. As the cries of the injured mingled with the groans of exhausted men, leaders moved across the field, surveying the consequences of their strategies. Marlborough, mounted and composed despite exhaustion, walked among his officers, acknowledging both the triumph and the cost. Eugene rode along the northern sector, ensuring captured French forces were secured and prisoners treated in accordance with contemporary codes of conduct. Though victorious, the leaders understood that the victory was fragile and that carelessness in the immediate aftermath could spark renewed chaos or rebellion among occupied territories. Civilians, too, bore witness to the battle's toll. Villages had been caught in the crossfire. Roofs were burned, granaries looted, and livestock slaughtered. Some families returned from hiding to find homes destroyed, yet others offered aid to the wounded, showing resilience amid despair. One local farmer later recounted the surreal contrast, the silence after gunfire, punctuated only by the groans of men and horses, as if the land itself mourned the violence inflicted upon it. The immediate geopolitical impact was evident. French ambitions in Bavaria had been decisively halted. Their plan to press toward Vienna, which would have threatened the very heart of the Habsburg Empire, was crushed in a single, calculated blow. Rumors traveled fast across rivers and villages that Louis XIV's forces had been soundly defeated, shattering the aura of invincibility surrounding the Sun King. Allies celebrated in cautious relief, knowing that while the war was far from over, Blenheim had shifted momentum decisively. The treatment of prisoners revealed both pragmatism and the moral compass of the era. Thousands of captured French soldiers were marched to designated holding areas. Officers were often treated with relative dignity, exchanged for ransom or held for political leverage. The psychological toll on prisoners was immense. Some despaired, others feared reprisals, and many wrote letters home describing the shocking defeat. Stories circulated of French generals imploring Marlborough for leniency, a testament to the unprecedented scale of the Allied victory. Amid the ruins, human stories emerged. An Allied sergeant risked his life to save a wounded French child left behind in a burning farmhouse. A Dutch artillery officer wept silently at the destruction of a centuries-old church that had served as a temporary battery during the battle. These vignettes highlighted the personal cost interwoven with grand strategy, the individual lives and sacrifices often hidden behind the sweeping narratives of victory and defeat. Chronologically, the first hours after the battle were a blur of triage and fortification. Allied forces secured key positions along the Danube to prevent counterattacks, while supply wagons were brought forward to replenish ammunition and food. By the following day, news of the victory had begun to travel, carried on messengers' horses and whispered through towns, igniting hope among allies and dread in French territories. Soldiers, weary and bloodied, began to write letters home, some in disbelief, others with pride, attempting to make sense of the carnage they had survived. Emotionally, the aftermath was a spectrum: awe at the scale of the victory, grief for fallen comrades, fear of retribution, and an overwhelming sense of historical significance. Marlborough's dispatches to London emphasized both the triumph and the necessity of continued vigilance. Eugene sent similar reports to Vienna, highlighting the discipline and resilience of Allied troops and the critical importance of sustaining momentum. Across Europe, the psychological shockwave was profound. The Sun King's aura of invincibility had been pierced, and the tides of war were forever altered. Blenheim's immediate aftermath was not just a matter of territory or captured cannons. It was a profound cultural and human moment. The battlefield became a grim classroom, teaching lessons of leadership, coordination, and courage. Civilians, soldiers, and commanders alike witnessed firsthand the consequences of ambition clashing with strategy. Every ruined wall, every injured soldier, every captured general was a vivid reminder of the stakes, setting the stage for the political and military ripples that would define the remainder of the War of the Spanish Succession. The echoes of Blenheim reverberated far beyond the Bavarian plains, reshaping the political and military landscape of Europe for decades. The Allied victory halted Louis XIV's ambitions in Central Europe, thwarting his dream of establishing a Franco-Spanish superpower that could dominate the continent. The French retreat from Bavaria signaled a strategic turning point in the War of the Spanish Succession, marking the first decisive defeat of France in a campaign that had, until then, seemed increasingly unstoppable politically. Blenheim strengthened the resolve of the Grand Alliance. England, emboldened under Queen Anne, solidified its leadership in coalition diplomacy. The Dutch Republic, witnessing the effectiveness of disciplined military coordination, invested further in fortifications and troop training, while the Habsburg Empire under Emperor Leopold I regained confidence in defending its territories. The battle also enhanced the personal reputations of its commanders. Marlborough's name became synonymous with brilliance in strategy and audacity in execution, while Prince Eugene of Savoy's reputation as a tactical genius was cemented across European courts. Their partnership would become a model of coordination between allied commanders, demonstrating the power of collaboration against numerically superior foes. Economically, the aftermath was both ruinous and transformative. French supply lines had been disrupted, war coffers drained, and morale across France's provinces shaken. Conversely, Allied territories secured from French advance saw renewed trade activity and the stabilization of borders. Villages and towns devastated during the battle underwent reconstruction, often using materials salvaged from destroyed structures. These rebuilding efforts provided both employment and a tangible sense of recovery for populations previously living in fear of conquest. The redistribution of resources and control of key transport routes along the Danube altered commercial patterns, giving the Allies a long-term logistical advantage. Culturally, Blenheim entered the collective European memory as a symbol of coalition success against a dominant power. Songs, poems, and paintings celebrated the courage of Allied troops, immortalizing the vivid moments of heroism amidst the chaos. The battle became a reference point for military theorists and historians, highlighting the importance of combined arms, disciplined maneuver, and the integration of intelligence into strategy. Tales of individual heroics: the sergeant saving a child, the infantryman holding a doorway, officers rallying troops under fire served as lessons in moral courage and resilience, inspiring future generations of leaders and soldiers strategically. The battle demonstrated that numerical superiority alone could not secure victory. The careful orchestration of troop movements, anticipation of enemy maneuvers, and flexibility in execution allowed a smaller but highly disciplined force to shatter a larger opponent. This principle would echo through European military thought for decades. Blenheim also reinforced the significance of logistics, reconnaissance, and terrain mastery, proving that a well-prepared army could exploit weaknesses in an overconfident foe, turning potential disaster into decisive triumph. The long-term political ripples were equally profound. France's aura of invincibility was shattered, undermining Louis XIV's diplomatic leverage. Negotiations and alliances shifted in response. Neutral powers began to reconsider their positions, wary of backing a seemingly unstoppable aggressor. Conversely, the Allied success strengthened faith in multilateral cooperation, providing a blueprint for future coalitions in Europe and beyond. The balance of power, a central concept in European politics, had shifted. Louis XIV's expansionist dreams had been checked, ensuring that no single state could dominate the continent without facing formidable opposition. What if scenarios linger in historical imagination? Had Tallard pressed his advantage and Marlborough hesitated, Europe might have witnessed the fall of Vienna and the collapse of the Habsburg Empire, creating a dramatically altered geopolitical map. Instead, Blenheim stands as a lesson in calculated risk, leadership under pressure, and the enduring impact of disciplined execution on the broader course of history. It exemplifies how a single engagement, meticulously planned and audaciously executed, can alter the destiny of nations and the lives of millions. Monuments, commemorative plaques, and preserved artifacts today remind visitors of the battle's enduring significance. The ruins of Blenheim and surrounding villages, reconstructed yet scarred, provide a tangible connection to the strategies, struggles, and sacrifices of that pivotal day. Trade routes and river crossings, once contested fiercely, became arteries of commerce under Allied control, cementing the victory's long-term benefits. Through maps, paintings, and documents, historians trace the ripple effect, from immediate territorial shifts to the shaping of European diplomacy and warfare in the 18th century. Ultimately, Blenheim's long-term impact lies not only in territory and treaties, but in the profound lessons it imparted on leadership, strategy, and human resilience. The alliance's success demonstrated that cooperation, intelligence, and courage could overcome brute force. It reshaped alliances, recalibrated power structures, and created a legacy of tactical brilliance that would be studied for centuries. In the annals of European history, Blenheim is remembered not merely as a battle, but as a turning point, a moment where the courage of individuals, the foresight of leaders, and the unity of nations intersected to rewrite the course of an entire continent. The Battle of Blenheim was more than a clash of armies. It was a defining moment in European history. It demonstrated the delicate interplay between strategy, leadership, and human endurance, proving that a smaller, disciplined force, acting with unity and foresight, could decisively overcome a numerically superior opponent. Marlborough and Eugene's partnership exemplified the power of collaboration and trust among commanders, a lesson as applicable on the battlefield as in broader leadership contexts. Blenheim also underscored the importance of preparation and adaptability. Every march, reconnaissance mission, and supply arrangement contributed to a framework that allowed the Allies to seize opportunities in real time. Commanders who anticipated the enemy's weaknesses and exploited them with precision secured victory, while those who relied solely on numerical strength, like the French under Tallard, suffered catastrophic consequences. The battle illustrates that in both war and life, foresight and flexible thinking are as critical as courage and commitment. From a human perspective, Blenheim illuminates the courage and resilience of soldiers, officers, and civilians alike. The bravery of individuals, the infantrymen holding a doorway, the cavalry charging against impossible odds, the civilian aiding the wounded, demonstrates how small acts of heroism ripple outward, affecting the outcome of larger events. These stories are enduring reminders that even amid sweeping historical forces, personal courage and ethical choices matter profoundly strategically. The battle reshaped Europe's political landscape. The immediate halt to Louis XIV's expansion ensured the survival of the Habsburg Empire, strengthened the Grand Alliance, and sent shockwaves through French military and political circles. It reasserted the principle that no empire, regardless of ambition, could dominate without facing coordinated resistance. Blenheim stands as a testament to the enduring value of alliances, the necessity of discipline, and the decisive impact of tactical intelligence combined with audacity. For modern audiences, Blenheim offers lessons beyond military history. It illustrates the importance of preparation under uncertainty, decisive action under pressure, and the value of unity in achieving common goals. Leaders, whether in politics, business, or social movements, can draw inspiration from Marlborough and Eugene's meticulous planning, bold execution, and ability to inspire loyalty and courage in those they led. The battle reminds us that success often hinges on vision, adaptability, and the courage to act decisively when the stakes are highest. As the smoke cleared from the Bavarian plains and the echoes of cannon fire faded, Blenheim left behind a legacy etched in both geography and memory. Monuments, commemorative writings, and enduring historical analysis preserve the lessons of that day. The Danube, the villages, the reconstructed battlefield all remain as silent witnesses to the bravery, strategy, and human cost of one of Europe's most decisive engagements. In the end, Blenheim was not merely a victory of armies, it was a triumph of foresight, coordination, and human resilience. It serves as a timeless reminder that decisive action, informed by intelligence and tempered by courage, can alter the course of history. As one surveys the wide plains, imagining the smoke, the dust, the clashing armies, it becomes clear that the lessons of Blenheim extend beyond war. They speak to the enduring human struggle to confront challenges, seize opportunities, and shape the future against overwhelming odds. History remembers it not only for its tactical brilliance, but for the enduring human spirit that made it possible.